This is the first of a two-part series that we've called the Soul's Ascent in Ancient Traditions. As you can see, this is our discussion hour at St. Sarah's. We had liturgy this evening, and then we have fellowship afterwards. So we'll welcome you to our table. This series, the Soul's Ascent in Ancient Traditions, is going to be two parts. The first part is Ancient Egypt with me, today on October 8, 2016. And the second part is going to be Greece, Rome, and the Gnostics with Brother Clark here on November 12, 2016. We split it into two because it's a fairly lengthy subject, which does indeed begin in Egypt. And so I wanted to give a brief overview of maybe some ideas why it started in Egypt as an idea. So as many of you know, the Christian idea of the soul ascending is something which is not new to us. It's something which for Christians is fairly normal. But at the time, say about 6,000 years ago, it was not a very common theme in religious traditions. So we're looking at the beginning of the Egyptian civilization, which most Egyptologists now are dating around 3000 BC. It could be a lot earlier than that based on some recent evidence, but it's difficult for us to make a determination, so we'll go with 3,000 or 4,000 BC. So it's at about the same time. It's contemporary with the Sumerian and the Akkadian civilization of Mesopotamia and of ancient Elam. So the Egyptian ideas of immortality, the reason that we're having this series is because their ideas of immortality had a profound impact on Greco-Roman, Jewish, and early Christian concepts, particularly in terms of the motif of post-mortem ascent, or after you die, your soul goes somewhere. How do we know that this had an impact on the Greeks and the West, and then finally on the Christians? Even in ancient Greece, Herodotus tells us that he said that the names of the gods came to Hellas from barbarians, and I myself concluded they derived specifically from Egypt. However, although there is definitely a line of continuity in the tradition of the soul's ascent in these ancient traditions, there are also some significant pitfalls and differences which I think are worth going over. Brother Clark here is going to tackle the most important part really for us, which is the Gnostic view, which comes out of an era of Greco-Roman religion, which needs to be understood properly in order for you to kind of grasp why the Christians and the Gnostic Christians were following the same tradition. So that's a much more detailed sort of problem, but the history, the very, very ancient history of the Egyptian concept of this and the development of the concept is also very important because it has clues to actually understanding why we think that the impact is so profound and direct. So let's take a look at the ideas, the Egyptian ideas on the afterlife. So we have basically the evidence that we have 3 or 4 texts which are important to what we're trying to treat here today. We'll begin with the pyramid texts. The pyramid text consists of hundreds of spells or utterances inscribed inside of some of the pyramids. They are the earliest of the Egyptian funerary texts, and indeed the oldest substantial corpus of written religious texts discovered anywhere in the world. They date from the reign of Pepi I, a pharaoh that no one has ever heard of, which was between 2332 and 2287 BC. It's a very long time ago, even before Peter was born. The central aim of the pyramid texts is to help the pharaoh's soul ascend to the sky. The interesting thing about some of these pyramid texts is, first of all, there is no mention of other people being involved in this operation. It begins with Pharaoh. I think it's worth looking at ancient Egyptian civilization for a second to understand why that was so. The Egyptians developed a very, very complex civilization because of where they were, because they were on the Nile, which had a very consistent ebb and flow. Unlike most other places in the world, the area which the arable land was relatively small on either bank of the Nile, and then when you get to the delta, it's much bigger, obviously. But when you get down into Upper Egypt, which is the southern part of Egypt, the area of arable land gets smaller and smaller. So the country itself has a sort of urban feel. Even in the agricultural areas, the population density at that time must have been one of the largest in the world. So population has a lot to do with it. The material basis for the Egyptian civilization is clearly linked to their need and the development of their religious practices. So where other peoples in the north and other places where their lifestyles are different may have had, extremely different ways of, or what we would consider to be extremely primitive ways of expressing their spirituality. The Egyptians, because of their material wealth and agricultural prowess, created this system, and at the top of it is this great sort of shepherd king, a person who is not really just a political leader, but someone who is revered as a sort of pastor. So I think that's very important because he embodies the nation in a way. He embodies the attributes of Egypt itself. And they see and connect those things together between the pharaoh and the people, but also the land. So it's very important. It's not sort of popping out of nowhere. It's not the Egyptians didn't come up with this stuff just because they were brilliant. There's no UFOs landing and giving them special information. It's because they built a society that required a focus. So if you're north-south, think of the land of Egypt, north-south, almost perfectly, the Nile goes. And the sun comes up in the east and goes down in the west. So the west is an important motif for the land of the dead, because that's where the sun goes under, and it rises in the east. So it's perfectly suited to the Egyptians. The importance of the sun to them and the importance of the Nile, on the other hand, are two very important themes. So the central aim of the pyramid texts is to help the pharaoh's soul ascend to the sky.
Is the soul the cloud?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
The association between heaven or the sky and immortality is a uniquely Egyptian invention. The first major theme in the pyramid texts is the pharaoh's ascent to the sky, and you'll see references to things that sound almost like Jacob's ladder. A ladder, walking up into the sky. The second major theme is becoming one with the stars in the afterlife. So there's a kind of mystical union between the soul of the pharaoh and the stars. The third major theme is the actual divinization, or theosis of the Pharaoh. So the Pharaoh is not only in the celestial kingdom, but he becomes one with God. These rights were extended to non-royal use, so in other words, it extended to the nobility, to the royal family, and finally to the skilled laborers and anybody who could afford the expensive rites that were involved in it, which, as you know, or maybe you don't know, as you go on in history, it becomes more and more open to lower and lower class people. So at the end of, by antiquity, late antiquity, you start seeing mummies for almost everyone with painted pictures on them. So these rights were extended to non-royal use by the Middle Kingdom, which was 2160 to 1560 BC. The second group of texts, or I should say it's not a second group, but there's a sort of subgroup which are coffin texts of the Middle Kingdom, which focused on the cult of Osiris and gave hope for immortality to all people. So that's when we start seeing the progression from Pharaoh to all people. So that's, again, Middle Kingdom, 2160 to 1560 BC. To give you some idea, I mean, that 1560 BC, that's, so, 500, 600, 700 years before Plato. So it's a very long time. Now, it's significant that earlier in the pyramid text, Osiris was said to dwell in the sky, although there are a few references in the pyramid text to Osiris's underworld kingdom. Most people associate, particularly in the New Kingdom, to Osiris being the god of the underworld. But actually, he has associations to the sky as well. Osiris presided over Amente, which was the west, and he's called foremost of the west. Most cemeteries were located on the west bank of the Nile. Amente is also called Duat, meaning underworld. So it could be a term for either the way, because on the west of the Nile, there are ridges of mountains, particularly in Lower Egypt. And in those ridges of mountains and valleys is where people like Tutankhamun were buried. They're huge valleys that have been, the caves have been excavated by human hands and turned into tunnels, and then they turned them into these big necropolises. Duat is also a celestial region below the horizon. So you see I mentioned that Duat was another word for Amente, the west. So Duat is also a celestial region below the horizon. So in other words, as the sun goes down, it goes into the Duat. It's very important because the sky and the underworld are becoming one. The sky is the body of the goddess Nuit. Duat lies within this, so she holds the secret. Later texts make Duat more chthonic or subterranean. So you can see that there is a relationship. It's very important later to understand that there is a celestial relationship and an underground or chthonic relationship with Duat. Pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom do not focus on becoming one with Re, the sun god, or Re himself, as in the pyramid text, but focus on the dead pharaoh becoming an Osiris figure. So you'll see often depictions of the pharaoh, or other people actually, later you go in history, and they're green or blue. That's because they have become one with, they've become an Osiris. Now the second set of texts that we're looking at here are the funerary texts of the Middle Kingdom. In the funerary texts of the Middle Kingdom, we find the guardians of celestial gateways and the tests that the deceased must pass, together with a plurality of skies. So it's starting to sound a lot like Western ideas of going from one, or Greek ideas maybe, in the strict sense, at the very beginning, sort of a progression, the seventh heaven, 7 gates, sometimes there are more. And these are all themes that are found much later in Greco-Roman times. And also, of course, in the occult. The Book of Two Ways is a Middle Kingdom text, which is a precursor to the Book of Going Forth by Day. I think you probably know that by the other name, which is
The Egyptian Book of the Dead.
The Egyptian Book of the Dead. The journey to the hereafter commences with sunrise at the eastern horizon, so that the journey itself takes place mainly in the sky. The Book of Two Ways, the journey to the hereafter, also involves going through a system of gateways with 7 guardians. This is significant later when Brother Clark talks about what the Greeks were up to. Then we have the coffin texts of the same period of the Middle Kingdom, which were also based on the earlier pyramid texts. So all these things, they're not inventions, they're just sort of working their way through thousands of years of development. Intended to give knowledge to the Pharaoh of the dangers and gateways through which the Pharaoh must pass in the afterlife. These are the coffin texts. So if you go to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, you can, if you go to the Egypt section, there are a few excellent examples of the inner coffin, the wooden coffin, which is extremely interesting, much more interesting than the stone sarcophagus, because it has actual spells written on the inside of it, all over the inside of it, and over the top.
Is that the part that is painted?
Yeah, it's really beautiful. Many different colors, and it has these explanations so that the soul of the pharaoh or the person who was in the coffin would remember what to do. So it's sort of like crib notes. So these included specific names and answers to questions he needed to provide in order to pass in safety. Much later, this became an important element in the Hellenistic and indeed Jewish narratives of ascent to heaven. So now we get to the New Kingdom, which is 1570 to 1069 BC. The famous Book of the Dead, or the Book of Going Forth by Day, which is what it calls itself. The gateways and guardians as a motif continue. Obviously there are theories, I should say, very good theories, because we have actual epigraphical evidence that there is a connection to Greece here, in the form of the Orphic gold leaves. And there are sheets of, you can, if you Google that, Orphic gold leaf, they're pounded out in very, very thin sheets, and then they wrote on them sort of like spells or poetry or ideas that were surrounding, in this case, instructions to the dead. The reason that there's fairly good evidence that that's where it came from is because the instructions look like they've been derived from the dialogue that is contained in the Going Forth by Day. They have a lot of similarities. And we also know, as I said, I mean, it's very rare in antiquity that you see someone say, that you have a smoking gun. So when Herodotus says, yeah, these came from Egypt. Okay, thank you. We don't know, we don't know the details, but at least we know that that was an idea which was floating out there. It's not complete speculation on our part. So the magic associated with words, this is another area that becomes very important in Greek magic. and in Christianity, by the way, and in actually for the Jews as well, the magic associated with words, especially names, is reflected in our own apocalyptic literature. The names that are in Going Forth by Day are of special significance. Going Forth, spell 194, describes the process whereby the human person is transformed into the Akh. In Egyptian, the word Akh means transfiguration. And both the concept and the hieroglyphic writing are intimately connected with the word for horizon. So you see the connection back to the Dua. These 7 gateways and their keepers are paralleled in the 7 gateways, or heavens, and their keepers of the later Hellenistic as well as Judeo-Christian ascent narratives. So you see that even our word seventh heaven probably derives from this. It's always nice to have really ancient stuff come prop up at you in your own language. So the differences, I don't want to underplay, or I don't want to give you the idea that it's smooth sailing from 3100 BC to us, right? There are significant changes. There's a little bit of grasping here, not a lot. I think it's fairly well established. Most of the things here are fairly well established, and there's a nice little trail of crumbs that goes from one to the other. Mostly because they were just so prolific. Egyptians and modern monotheists hold diametrically opposed views on the relationship between the corpse and the soul. This is one of the big divisions that I think is worthy of some investigation, because it also underlies some ambiguities in Christianity, which have always been very interesting to me, and ambiguities in Gnosticism, frankly. So to understand the relationship between the soul, the spirit, the body, because I have always been given to the theory, to an old European idea, which was called the Trichotomy of human existence, which you'll see rise up in literature from the Rosicrucians and from people like Rudolf Steiner and others, who felt that there was an injustice made by the Western Church at a certain point in time when they decided that there was no such thing, that the soul and the spirit were basically the same. So it's a very big deal, because that trichotomy, for me, is extremely important, because it represents the triune, or the Trinity, as a sort of constant and a very important force in the universe. But this is why I think focusing on some of the differences is important. We might have something to learn. The Egyptians understood the corpse as preserving the person's essence, rather than merely the physical remains. So that is really very important, because when we say, oh, that's not him, but there's this part of our culture which thinks that it's him, right? I'm a big horror fan, everybody knows that. Every horror movie in the world is based around, somebody's dead body coming back to life, or something, right? So there's something there. Why do we have holy places for people to be buried in? Why is, in our apocalyptic literature and in the New Testament, why did it become important for the church to preserve bodies? Why do monasteries keep bones of monks? Why do we even bother to embalm people and put them in the ground, or put them in a little mausoleum or in a drawer? Well, I have a feeling that it might have something to do with this. So, the sah is an Egyptian word for the body. It was not expected to be resurrected after death. So, whatever you think you know about why they embalmed people is incorrect. They did not expect the body to come back and do anything. And and Christians, especially Roman Catholics, used to have this big taboo about not being cremated because they wanted the whole body intact. The ka is the most ritually important ancient Egyptian concept of the individual afterlife. The ka was an image of the living person. The ka could just as well dwell in a statue, a portrait of the living person. It was considered to habit the tomb and could ascend at death and live in the sky. So the ka is a kind of horcrux, or a kind of a way of placing your essence in something or moving it around. It's very interesting. Not to be confused with the ba, which was depicted as a human-headed bird that flies up to the sky at death. However, the ba was also believed to visit the grave of the deceased. Bas were corporeal and could eat and drink. That's why they left the food and the wine and assumed non-human forms. It was a ba that the deceased could travel throughout the earth and the sky. So one is incorporeal being that can be placed anywhere. And another is a vehicle of the essence of the person to go here in the world of the living. And apparently also, it says non-human forms, so I want to just throw in there that this basically means that shape-shifting is a thing, even for people who are dead, which is pretty cool. Not to open up a whole other can of worms, which I could do, but there are a lot of texts in ancient Christianity which refer to this kind of thing. That'll be a whole other lecture.
I'll do it.
So the Akh, or the spirit that lives, it's the Akh that lives in the afterlife. So you have Sa, Ka, Ba, and Akh. The Egyptian understanding of the experience of the afterlife was, in effect, one of spiritual transfiguration. This is where I wanted to go with that. That it's a transfiguration. It's not just a simple formula of you die, your soul goes to become part of Re or Osiris, or become An-Osiris. Your soul is a multifaceted, multidimensional, and plenipotentiary vehicle. Your essence is divided into things, and you have all these ways of maneuvering in the universe, which is extremely interesting. But they're all part of a transformation, but not just a transformation, it really focuses on transfiguration, which is very different. And obviously, there is only one, I think probably one religion in today's world that really heavily focuses on transfiguration, right? And that's Christianity. At least in the way that we're talking about it. So the Egyptian word for horizon, Akhed, which denotes the place where the boundary between the visible and the hidden, is located, is derived from the same root as Akh. I'll repeat, the Egyptian word for horizon, Akhed, which denotes the place where the boundary between the visible and the hidden is located, is derived from the same root as Akh. The visible by the visible, the hidden by the hidden. Ringing any bells? that's where I'm gonna end it.
Oh,
So questions, I have also just for people who are watching this, some excellent resources for you to look at. Dylan Burns, The Apocalypse of the Alien God, Platonism, the Exile of Scythian Gnosticism, University of Pennsylvania Press, 2014. A.F. Segal, S-E-G-A-L, Heavenly Ascent in Hellenistic Judaism, Early Christianity and Their Environments. De Gruyter, Berlin, 1980. And a wonderful piece, Eliezer Gonzalez, The Traditional Egyptian Antecedents to Greco-Roman Postmortem Ascent, published by Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia. And now your questions. You can turn it off now.